Hey everyone, this is Oscar from Underdog, and today I'm going to talk quietly because my flatmate is giving therapy in the next room. So forgive me for whispering a bit like this. Today I have a point I want to make to you about the value of imbalance in music. So let me now play you a loop from a techno track, and I'm going to just let it play 2 or 3 times, and I want you to just sit with the feeling that it gives you. I want you to just listen with your full attention and notice what your impression is of it, right? In terms of how boring or exciting you find it, where the tension and release goes. Think about these things right now. All right, that's enough. That's enough. If you want to hear it again, just rewind the video. So what was your impression of this? My first impression of this was, when I hit play on it, I was like, wow, this is really stable and boring. In terms of drum groove, in terms of that bass line, it's just da 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 da. It just hits you with the same monotonous note over and over and over again. So my first reaction to this track was like, it's a bit crude, it's a bit rough, you know? And then that turnaround happens, that little trick at the end where it goes da-da, and then suddenly that refreshed my ears so much, like the absolute contrast between those two sections refreshed me so much that then when the next loop happens, my whole being is really reaching out toward that end. It's like waiting. It's like, oh, is it coming now? Is it coming now? When is it coming? And I'm internally kind of counting towards it. This creates, in this crude, stable part, an incredible amount of tension that then we know there has already been promised that it's going to be released at the end of 8 bars in this case. And so I would say that the imbalance of the composition, the boring or the monotony, let's say, the monotony and then the drastic punch of the turnaround, they're kind of out of balance. They lean very heavily in contrast to each other, but that makes this an incredibly memorable track for something that, for 90% of its time, is incredibly boring or stable. And that reminds me of a friend of mine who once said that when things are in balance, it's boring. When things are too out of balance, it's exhausting. And so what we want is to depart from that balance with a little bit of asymmetry so that things become exciting. So if this track was going all over the place all the time, it would be exhausting. But what it does now is it finds a place where it's almost balanced and then really stretches that monotonous part out. Does that make sense? So a bold decision to break the rules is absolutely essential and makes for a signature track that's unforgettable. Let's have a little closer look at what this track looks like in detail. All right, so what we're working with here is a loop that's 8 bars long and is almost 135 BPM. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make myself a little drum rack, and in this drum rack I'm going to program the pattern so that we understand conceptually what's going on. First step would be to start with a chunky kick, and that's easy because that's 4 to the floor. So hop. Create a new MIDI track. We've got 8 bars here. So actually it might be easier for me to program a 1-bar loop and to then later on work on the turnaround, right? So kick, 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 kick. Very simple 4 on the floor kick pattern. There's a clap on every backbeat. There's even a bit of a reversed clap in there. Here, let me take this clap. I'm gonna call it reversed clap. And then there's an upbeat open hi-hats from the 909 as well, simply on every upbeat. So it would be something like, cool. Let me turn down that reverse clap a bit. Now we've done a pretty good approximation of the simple groove, except that here on every weak 16th note there is some kind of rimshot. And I find that interesting because this beat otherwise really emphasizes the 8th note. It's every 8th note. right? But once you fill up those weak 16th notes, suddenly you emphasize every 16th notes, which makes everything feel like it's going faster. It drives the groove more. I feel like if you put percussion mostly on the 8th notes, then you have this kind of chunky groove. And once you put stuff on the 16th notes, you get this kind of rolling groove. These are the words that I associate with it. So let me do that right now. Okay, we're gonna have to make this real short and snappy. Yeah, let's make it something like this for now. And so every 16th note, every weak 16th notes. If the word weak 16th note doesn't mean anything to you, watch my syncopation video. That's a very important video to watch for this. So then it goes something like. So let's see if we can mess a little bit with the velocity and the timing to get it to feel a bit more correct. All right, I was pushing around the sound design a little bit to kind of more closely approximate the original, but we're not too far off. This is good enough to understand what's going on, right? And then in the original, there was this 8th notes, 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Just very simple bass line, right? And so this is how far I've come so far. I'm just kind of nudging the sound design towards where I think it should be. There's another layer missing in the high mids that mimics the bass as well, so I'll just find a candidate for that as well. Okay, I wasn't convinced by the synth that I was working on, so what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to put in a sample. All right, this has got some vibes. Nice. Suddenly gives a lot more character to the mids, something that the drums were kind of lacking. Now notice how I've done all of this in one track. Usually I wouldn't do that simply because it's not super ergonomic to be messing around inside of a drum rack. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's just not so easy to make subgroup and to tweak individual sounds. But for this educational video, I thought it was helpful. I've started working at the level of half of a bar simply because it literally is so monotonous. So it's like every 2 kicks, the loop is exactly the same. You might even say that the rhythmic cell is half a bar. And then here at the end, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to change up the rhythmic motif to do something different. And so what I'll do now with all of this is I'm going to consolidate this MIDI file, which means that instead of it looping, you see those little loop markers here, the little vertical lines inside of this pink bar? Well, I'm going to just do Command J, which consolidates it. So instead of it being looped, it's like one big MIDI file. And then here at the end, what we got to do is we're going to emphasize the heck out of this moment here, where this innocent little looking snare drum is. We're going to delete all this, delete all this, delete all this, and instead we're going to program something big here. And I'm thinking of maybe a new sample, like an orchestral stab, but let's see what happens when I simply play it like this. Nice. So we set up with a super monotonous motif here, and then we absolutely break it. That's fun. A few things that happen here is I think that the bass plays a slightly different note, and then the top synth also is slightly different. So I'm going to tweak this a little bit. There we go. A single full tone down. That's all it takes. Love it. And the high synth can have a bit more decay on it. I think the bass could even have a bit more decay on it. Excellent. And I think this loop now captures the essence of this track, really. And to bring it back to the point about looking how out of balance things are, we've got this long section and then here this little crazy flourish at the end. As a composition, this is really quite out of balance, but in a very exciting and original way. I hope this gave you some inspiration for your own productions that you can take back into your own DAW. If some of this was too technical for you, go follow my Foundations of Electronic Music course. Come show us on the Discord channel what you did with this. And until next time, stay producing, be good to each other, and take care. Bye-bye.